Hey there, folks. Good to have you with me tonight. I hope you're all cozy, maybe with a warm blanket and a cup of something soothing. I've got a real humdinger of a story for you, one that'll make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It's a tale from way back, shared with me by someone who lived through it, and I'm gonna pass it on to you just as I heard it. So, settle in, turn down the lights if you're feeling brave, and let's step into the shadows together. I take you back to 1968, to a small farming town in the heart of Minnesota. Think of endless fields, dense woods, and marshes that stretch out like a maze under the big, open sky. Life was simpler then, slower, and for the kids, summer and early fall meant roaming free, picking berries, hunting for mushrooms, or just exploring. That's where our story starts, with a group of young folks, 8th graders, full of energy and not a care in the world. There were 5 of them, 4 girls and 1 boy. The boy was Jimmy, a scrappy kid from down the road, always ready for an adventure. The girls were Betty, Clara, Ellen, and Mary, and all tight as sisters. They decided one Sunday morning to head out to a far-off swamp to pick cranberries. It was a bit of a trek, but the promise of those bright red berries was worth it. They set out at dawn, around 6 in the morning, each carrying a bucket or a basket, plus a burlap sack to dump their haul into. The plan was simple: fill a bucket, empty it into the sack, tie it up to keep the berries safe, sling the sack over your shoulder like a backpack, and carry the bucket home. The weather that morning was perfect, crisp and clear, with the sun just starting to warm the earth. The group trudged along, laughing, teasing each other, telling silly stories. Before they knew it, they'd reached the swamp, a sprawling, soggy stretch of land dotted with hummocks of dry ground and thick with cranberry bushes. The berries were everywhere, ripe and red, practically begging to be picked. They found a good spot near a tall, gnarled oak tree, a landmark in the middle of the marsh. Jimmy tied a bright red rag to one of the high branches so they could spot it from a distance. They stacked their sacks by the tree, had a quick bite of bread and cheese, and got to work. Each kid picked a spot where the berries looked thickest, spreading out a bit but staying close enough to hear each other. They'd call out now and then, just to check in, but mostly they focused on filling their buckets, moving from one hummock to another. They knew better than to wander too deep into the swamp. There were dangerous spots out there, what the locals called windows, deep sinkholes covered with a thin layer of green scum. Step into one of those, and you'd be gone in a heartbeat, sucked down into the black muck with no hope of getting out. About an hour or so passed, maybe a little more, and they started drifting back to the oak tree to empty their buckets into the sacks and grab a bite to eat. One by one, they showed up: Jimmy, Betty, Clara, Ellen, but no Mary Ann. At first, they figured she was just lagging behind, maybe chasing a particularly good patch of berries. They shouted her name, called out in the old hoot and holler way they used in the woods. Nothing. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2, then 3. They scoured the nearby hummocks, careful not to stray too far themselves, their voices growing hoarse from yelling. Still nothing. Not a trace of Mary Ann, not even her bucket. I can still picture the walk back to town, the weight of those sacks on their shoulders nothing compared to the weight in their hearts. They went straight to Mary Ann's house, where she lived alone with her mama, Mrs. Carter. Her pa had passed when she was just a toddler, and it had been just the 2 of them ever since. When they told Mrs. Carter what happened, she didn't just cry, she wailed, a sound so raw it could tear your soul in two. She collapsed right there, and they had to take her to the local clinic to calm her down. By the next morning, the whole town was up in arms. They organized a search party, even called in some National Guard boys from the nearby base to comb the swamp. They trudged through the muck for hours, poking sticks into the water, checking every hummock, every thicket. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a scrap of cloth, not even that bucket. By nightfall, they called it off, figuring Mary Ann must have stumbled into one of those deadly windows and been swallowed up by the swamp. It was a hard pill to swallow, but sometimes, nature takes what it wants, and there's nothing you can do. 3 days passed, heavy with grief. Then, on the 4th day, word spread like wildfire through town. Mary Ann had been found. Some farmers from a neighboring village had brought her in on a hay cart, straight to the clinic where her mama was still recovering. The kids rushed over as soon as they heard, desperate to see their friend. But when they laid eyes on her, they barely recognized her. She was gaunt, her skin pale as milk, and her hair, once a rich chestnut brown, was streaked with gray, like she'd aged 20 years in just a few days. When Mary Ann could finally talk, she told them what happened, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd gotten caught up in picking berries, so focused she didn't hear the others calling. When her bucket was full, she looked up to find the oak tree, but it was nowhere in sight. She shouted, wandered a bit, but no one answered. Panic set in. She started running from one hummock to another, nearly stepping into a window before catching herself at the last second. The sun began to sink, and she realized she was lost, truly lost, in the middle of that endless swamp. Her memory of what came next was fuzzy, like a dream you can't quite hold on to. She spent that first night curled up under a low pine, shivering in the cold, eating handfuls of lingonberries to keep her strength up. The darkness was suffocating, the kind of black that presses in on you, full of strange sounds, rustles, and whispers that didn't seem to come from any animal she knew. She barely slept, jumping at every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl. The next day, she wandered aimlessly, her throat raw from shouting for help. No one answered. By evening, she was so weak she could hardly stand. She dropped to her knees on a patch of moss and did something she'd never done before. She prayed. Now, back then, in that little town, folks didn't talk much about God. There wasn't a church for miles, and the kids, well, they were raised to think more about science than faith. But Mary Ann, desperate and alone, poured out her heart. Please, if you're up there, don't let me die out here. My mama can't lose me. Get me out of this cursed swamp. I want to live. That second night was worse than the first. The cold bit deeper, and the sounds of the swamp grew stranger, almost like voices murmuring just out of earshot. She huddled under another tree, her mind playing tricks on her. She swore she saw shapes moving in the dark, tall and thin, slipping between the trees, watching her with eyes she couldn't see. At one point, she thought she heard her name, whispered on the wind, but when she called out, there was only silence. Morning came, gray and damp, and Mary Ann forced herself to keep moving, though she had no idea where she was going. Then, like a miracle, she heard voices, real ones this time, women calling to each other as they picked berries. She screamed for help with what little strength she had left, staggering toward the sound. She caught sight of a woman in a white scarf, and then her legs gave out. Everything went black. When she came to, she was lying on a cot in a small, rough cabin. A woman was bustling by an old wood stove, stirring something in a pot. Mary Ann tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. She could only cry, tears streaming down her face as the woman noticed her and came over. The woman spoke, but Mary Ann couldn't hear a thing, her ears still ringing with the silence of the swamp. More people came throughout the day, asking questions she couldn't answer, feeding her broth and some kind of herbal tea that burned going down. That evening, an old crone shuffled in, bent over a walking stick, her face lined like cracked leather. She stood by Mary Ann's cot, muttering words the girl couldn't make out, stroking her hair with a gnarled hand. Then she splashed cold water on Mary Ann's face and clapped her hands together with a crack so sharp it jolted the girl upright. Suddenly, sound rushed back in, and Mary Ann's voice broke free. Where am I? What's happening to me? Within the hour, the cabin was packed with folks, all talking over each other. They told her how the berry pickers had heard her cries, searched until they found her collapsed on the edge of the swamp, and dragged her back on a makeshift stretcher of branches. She'd been out of it, mumbling in her delirium about her mama, a tree, and pleading, over and over, please, save me. It took a couple of weeks before Mary Ann was strong enough to go back to school. Her friends welcomed her quietly, no one prying too much, just offering small kindnesses. They started calling her our lost lamb, not out of meanness, but with a kind of tender pity. She didn't mind. But something had changed in her. She'd go quiet for long stretches, staring off into nothing, like she was still seeing that swamp in her mind's eye. Before the new year, she and her mama made a trip to a little church in a nearby town, 50 miles away. Not long after, the kids noticed a small cross hanging around her neck. Now, this caused a bit of a stir. Back then, wearing something like that could get you in hot water, especially with the school. One of the teachers must have said something, because Mary Ann got called into a meeting with the principal and some other folks. They asked why she'd wear a cross when she was supposed to be focused on more practical things. She looked them square in the eye and said, "Something saved me out there in that swamp. Call it what you want, but I'm not taking this off." The teachers, to their credit, didn't push it. They knew she was a good student, with big dreams of college, and they let it be. Time moved on, as it always does. The story faded into the background, and even the gray in Mary Ann's hair stopped drawing stares. She and her mama kept making those trips to the church now and then, and folks just accepted it as part of who they were. After high school, the group of friends drifted apart, each heading down their own path. But here's the thing that sticks with me, even after all these years. What really happened out there in that swamp? Was it just luck that Mary Ann made it out, or was there something more, something watching over her? And those shapes she thought she saw, those whispers in the dark, were they just her mind playing tricks, or was there something else in that marsh, something old and hungry, waiting for a lost soul to wander too close? I've heard tell of places like that, where the land itself seems alive, where the shadows don't always stay still. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Mary Ann brought a piece of that swamp back with her, something that still lingers in her quiet moments, waiting to be seen again. Well, folks, that's the story for tonight. I hope it gave you a good shiver or two. If it did, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves a creepy tale before bed. Thanks for keeping me company, and until next time, sleep tight, and maybe keep a light on, just in case. Good night.